A lot of changes happened in Season 15 of Apex Legends, but one of the biggest changes has to be the Mastiff shotgun returning to ground loot. Because of that, there are a couple questions that we do need to ask. Is the Mastiff shotgun worth running in the new season? What is the best way to use the Mastiff? And do you want to start destroying your opposition instead of getting absolutely destroyed? If you want to know the answer to any of these questions, then stay tuned for this masterclass on how to use the Mastiff shotgun. The first section that we'll get into, like any of my other gun guys, would have to be part of the stats. Mastiff has 5 shells, and within each of those shells is 8 pellets. The gun itself shoots in a horizontal line and actually tightens when you ADS. Now here's something you need to know about ADSing. When you look at the spread of the Mastiff shotgun, the difference is around 20 to 25%. When you look at the spread here, you can see that there's a clump of 6 pellets in the center along with 2 on each of the edges. This pattern does not change when you ADS, but instead shrinks. And even though it shrinks when you ADS, those 2 pellets are still on the outside of that 6 pellet spread on the inside. But the closer you get to the target, the closer that those pellets become to the center. This is why it's such a big deal to try to get as close to the target as possible, because if you do not go in as close as you can, it'll be a matter of 2 pellets that you won't even hit because it's such a far away from the center mass of the target where you're actually shooting. This leads into point 2, which is the headshot versus body shot damage and knowing where to aim your gun. Speaking about damage, each pellet does a roughly 11 damage to the body and legs, but it varies its damage for the head based on the helmet the person is wearing. The shots per kill depends on the armor the opposition is using, but the difference between landing full headshots versus full body shots is not very much. The shells per kill is roughly the same for landing full headshots versus body shots, with the only difference being if the person is wearing a white helmet or not. If they are, then it is 1 less shot per kill if they have no armor or if they are wearing purple armor. Essentially, the moment they start wearing a blue helmet, there's no point in trying to only land headshots. But this is hypothetical because I seriously doubt most players will be able to land full pellet headshots anyways. It's something extremely hard to do. So instead, I would recommend aiming for the body in most situations. But if you are at close range, try jumping and shooting down at the target. This changes the angle in which you are shooting your target by a slight amount. And with that, while aiming for the head, if you miss, you might hit their shoulders and below. And so because of that, you might actually have a higher chance of hitting both of them, and therefore can increase your damage even though it might be slight. If you've learned something so far about the Mastiff shotgun, then consider liking the video, and also dropping me a subscription if you want to find out more about Apex Legends and the guns that it has. It would really mean a lot if you did, and it would really support me in my growth in my YouTube channel. With that, let's get back to the video. For the third point, we're going to start looking at gun attachments and also a reload trick. The shotgun bolts increase the rounds per minute of the gun from 66 with no bolt, to 73 with the white, to 76 with the blue, and finally to 79 with the purple. When you look at the straight-on stats of the bolts, it might seem pretty negligible. Going from 66 to 73, eventually to 79 doesn't seem like that much of an increase. But it is a pretty large increase going from no bolt at all to a bolt. So at the very least, try to get the first bolt, even if it is a white, because that'll upgrade your RPM tremendously. For reloading, the time drastically drops if you fire all of your shots in your gun. The Mastiff reloads extremely quickly, but only if you tack reload instead of doing an empty reload. The difference is pretty massive because when you empty reload, you have to essentially cock back the bolts for the gun. So by the time you cock back the bolts of the gun, you miss out on having around 2-ish shots if you just waited and maybe reloaded with 1 shell left in the gun. So if you're in a deep fighting situation, consider firing only 4 shells and then reloading a shell or 2 before firing again. This will maximize your uptime when using the gun, and it can be the difference between living or dying. I do want to note that for whatever reason, the first 2 shells that you put into the Mastiff load extremely quickly. I don't know if this is a bug or what it is, but it's so fast. So I especially recommend just reloading 2 shots at a time. Load in 2, maybe fire a shot or 2, and then continue on from there. It's really finicky and interesting, but I would encourage you to test it out to see what you think about it yourself. Moving on to the next section. Next section is the preferred distance for using the Mastiff. Obviously, the Mastiff is a shotgun, and so you're going to want to be as close to the target as possible. But when should you ADS versus when should you hip fire? To be honest, I find it hard to find a reason to not really ADS with this weapon. By the time you pull your trigger, there's a substantial time in between the next shot. So you could aim in ADS, fire a shot, un-ADS, and then strafe around a little bit and then fire again, just to try to avoid the enemy's bullets. The timing of the spread of the gun is so so massive when you ADS that I think it's just worth it to try to ADS all the time. It's essentially a 25% increase in the tightening of your spread, because those 2 pellets on the outside of the spread then come to the center. And so why wouldn't you want to have a better chance of just landing a ton of extra pellets? But if you're having trouble hitting the Mastiff shots, then I would consider hip firing. The larger spread is easier to hit in some ways, but at the same time, you also sacrifice potential damage. So it's really up to you on what you would prefer. I am really used to using the Mastiff, so I will essentially always ADS, because I would rather land more damage than I would chip damage over time. Instead, I would just recommend trying to get close to the target in general. The only exception for not ADSing is when you're at extremely close distances. I'm talking to like a meter or 2 close range. At 2 meters or fewer, the difference between ADSing and hip firing is very negligible. And when you ADS, you might end up missing more of your shots anyways because of the FOV decrease, because you zoom in more, and because of the gun just being a lot larger within your field of view. But at the end of the day, do what's comfortable, do what allows you to put out the most amount of damage, but make sure you essentially practice with this weapon. So in conclusion, I would not engage at further than 8 meters with this gun. I haven't really talked meters as I would with other guns because ADSing is just so powerful, so you just want to ADS anyways. But generally, 10 meters and fewer is the max that I would potentially want to go, but obviously the closer in, the better. ADSing with that 25% decrease in the hip fire spread is just amazing. And so I would highly consider just ADSing all the time and being as close to your target as possible. In this last section, we're going to be talking about the recommended loadouts and when to use the Mastiff. My favorite loadout pairing with the Mastiff would have to be the R301, Flatline, or even the Volt. I strongly recommend using any sort of automatic rifle that you are proficient in using. I suppose you could use a scout rifle or a sniper rifle if you really wanted to, but I find that the difference in ranges can be kind of finicky depending on what's happening. For example, the strength of the Mastiff along with an R301, Flatline, or Volt is that after you land a shot or 2, you can switch over to your primary and spray to get that final knock. But if you're using a sniper rifle or a scout rifle, if you were off by a couple damage and you whiff a couple of your shots, it is a lot harder to guarantee finish that target because of the fact that it is a burst gun and that you're tap firing instead of a fully automatic weapon. Now, don't get me wrong, the Mastiff shotgun is extremely good at close range, and it is by far one of my most comfortable guns to use at close range. But if you solely use it at close ranges, then you might have some issues finishing out targets, especially if multiple people engage you at once, which is why I recommend using an automatic rifle along with it. But at the end of the day, you can use this gun to burst down really anyone at close range if you're good at aiming it, but it can get finicky depending on what range your other gun is good at. The rule of thumb though is just use guns that you're good at using. It doesn't matter if you use the quote-unquote meta guns if you're not good at hitting any of the shots. Make sure you practice those guns, get good at them, and then start using them. But until then, make sure you use guns that you're actually used to using so you can get that guaranteed damage in. As for when to use this gun, I'd say it really depends. You could open up by firing a Mastiff shot if they were at close range, or you could open up by putting your primary gun into it. It really depends. I personally like to open up with an automatic weapon because if they're standing still, I can do a whole lot more than the maximum damage with the Mastiff is at close range. Plus, they're standing still, so it can be a lot easier to land most of a full clip of an R301 into their back or something. There is one scenario though that I would recommend opening up with your Mastiff instead of your R301 or your Flatline or whatever gun you have as your primary weapon, and that is if they get the jump on you. If they get the jump on you, use the Mastiff and try to land as many shots as possible. Then afterwards, switch over to your fully automatic rifle or whatever primary weapon you have. Some days, you're just not good at hitting the Mastiff shots, but even if you land a couple, it's a lot easier to finish out targets with that fully automatic weapon than it is with a Mastiff shotgun. After all, it's the difference between firing 5 shells versus an entire clip of a weapon. It's the worst when you've damaged an enemy to the point where they're at a sliver of their health, but then you can't hit your shotgun shots and then they end up just murking you. So consider using your shotgun first in these sort of situations and then switching over to your primary weapon afterwards. Overall, the Mastiff is one of my favorite shotguns, if not my absolute favorite. I do recommend running this gun off of drop or really at any point in the game. The time to kill and the damage that it offers is immense if you use it correctly. That being said, if you want to get better at using more than just the Mastiff, then consider watching this video on how to get better at aiming, or this video on how to use the Peacekeeper if you want to get more used to using this gun in general. With that, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to like this video. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. God bless.